Braden, and we are here to represent the meat industry and why plant-based proteins should not be considered meat. Red meat has been an important part of the human diet throughout human evolution. When included as part of a healthy, varied diet, red meat provides a rich source of high biological value proteins and essential nutrients, some of which are more bioavailable than in alternative food sources. In many parts of the world, meat makes up a considerable portion of a typical diet. And it contributes to proteins, minerals, vitamins, and fat, and these nutrients are important for their beneficial effects on your well-being. Misconceptions about meat and its effect on health need to be tackled head-on. The proper labeling of plant-based proteins is needed to diffuse any misconceptions about meat. Human beings were born omnivores. Meat has been part of our diet through the ages, so why stop now?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Morgan, and this is Josh. So plant protein-based diets are becoming more common in today's society with the added benefits of these diets from health, environmental benefits, as well as it's going to be new opportunities for cultures who don't believe in the consumption of true meat. With all of this, why shouldn't protein-based foods be allowed to be labeled as meat if it's going to be benefiting everyone in the future?
So there's the assumption that vegan and vegetarian food is automatically better for you because they don't contain any meat. But some experts say most meats alternatives really aren't healthy foods. They may be vegan, fortified with minerals, or devoid of saturated fats or cholesterol, but they are highly processed, full of salt and refined ingredients as opposed to whole foods. Many are just as high, if not higher, in fat, sodium, and calories than the real thing. So what are some health benefits that a plant-based protein can provide that animal meat cannot?
Saturated fats are those that are solid at room temperature and tend to contribute to cardiovascular disease because it drives up your total cholesterol levels. In the long run, this will eventually clog your arteries and could cause a heart attack. Food like nuts, avocados, and fish have far less saturated fats than red and other dark meats, and they are dubbed as healthy fats. Okay, so soy contains all essential amino acids, which is then considered a complete protein like meat. This is obviously a healthier source of protein, considering it does not contain high saturated fats as well as high cholesterol that is found in real meat.
Meat contains heme iron, which is far better absorbed by the body than non-heme iron found in soy. Some soy proteins can in fact inhibit the body's ability to absorb iron. Given these facts, it is not accurate to say that they are the same and they should not be labeled the same. I'm friends with a girl who is anemic, and she has to consume as much red meat in her diet as possible in order to keep her iron levels up. Plant-based proteins do not contain the same form of iron as red meat, nor do they contain the same amount of iron per gram.
So the proper labeling of plant-based meats ensures the integrity of the meat supply. Calling plant-based products meat without knowing the inspection process, the nutrient profile of these products, food safety, or anything is a disservice to farmers, ranchers, and consumers. It is important these products don't misrepresent the beef industry. Cattlemen care for their livestock and invest a lot of time and money to ensure the customer has a safe, nutritious, and affordable product. So how can you call a plant-based product meat when it is made in a lab and undergoes a completely different process?
So in Central America, 40% of the rainforests have been cleared and burned in the last 40 years, mostly for cattle pasture to feed the export market. Meat is too expensive for the poor in these beef exporting countries, yet in some cases cattle have taken out highly productive traditional agriculture land. 56 million acres of the U.S. land are producing hay for livestock, and only 4 million acres are producing vegetables for human consumption. So, yeah, I guess that's it. According to Brown University, who did a study on food sustainability, they found that the grain being used to feed livestock could produce enough meat to feed 2.6 billion people. But if we took the grain that is being used to feed that livestock, we could produce a vegetarian diet for 6 billion people. With the constant increase of the population globally and the current shortage of food, we need to be looking at ways to feed more people with the current land that is available.
Deforestation for purely the purpose of creating pasture could be considered presumptuous. Deforestation in Central America is commonly illegal and is in service of the logging industry. Leftover clear-cut land is simply used for agricultural services. Pasture land in North America is commonly poor land and not suitable for crop production. To infer that pasture land could be growing vegetables or grain is not accurate in most situations. Take this province for example. Most hayland is hayland because it is deemed unsuitable for crop production, whether it be on account of moisture levels or the terrain or soil properties such as salinity. Lastly, this particular argument is irrelevant to the labeling of food products.
So, consumers are being confused and misled when they're sold burgers and other meat products that contain alternative protein. While at this time alternative protein sources are not a direct threat to the beef industry, we do see improper labeling of these products as misleading. Our goal is to head off the problem before it becomes a larger issue. Some farmers feared their business were at risk because shoppers often did not realize they were buying plant-based products rather than products from animals. Consumers may not always be getting what they want from the grocery store. So, if we were to label plant-based proteins as meat, would it be fair to say we should label animal flesh-based meat as animal-based so the consumer can distinguish between the two?
When researchers combine the trends with forecasts of population growth and income growth for the coming decades, they were able to project that diets in 2050 will contain fewer servings for fruits and vegetables, about 60% more empty calories, and 25 to 50% more pork, poultry, beef, and dairy eggs. These are changes that are known to increase the prevalence of type 2 diabetes, coronary disease, and some cancers.
Many religions have strict guidelines and do not believe in eating certain types of meat, so don't eat meat at all. Other religions have guidelines where they have to fast. Considering the fact that Canada is becoming very culturally diverse, we need to be able to meet all the needs of cultures. With a plant protein-based meat, this is virtually identical to real meat. All cultures can take part in eating a type of meat.
A friend of mine who is a Seventh-day Adventist, who is a devout vegetarian, disagrees with the labeling of plant-based proteins as meat and would in fact not purchase or consume anything labeled as meat. His exact words are, if it ever had a face, it is to be considered meat. If it never had a face, then it isn't meat and should not be labeled as meat.
So, the U.S. Cattlemen's Association, which represents the cattle industry, filed a petition in February with the U.S. Department of Agriculture asking for specific definitions for terms like beef and meat. According to the USDA, items labeled with such words should inform customers that the product is derived naturally from animals as opposed to alternative proteins such as plants and insects or artificially grown in a laboratory. We should define the word meat so that it cannot be used to label products that do not contain animal flesh. With the labeling of certain animal-based meat products as beef, will the labeling of plant-based beef substitutes as beef be an accurate and honest label?
In your one article, U.S. cattlemen want word meat banned from meat-based foods from the tree hugger. They explain that it is confused customers because meat has to have animal flesh in it. This is not entirely true. If you search the definition of meat, it also states that meat is the edible part of fruits and nuts. Therefore, it should be allowed to be called meat.
According to Andrea Giancoli, who is a registered dietitian in California, plant protein-based foods are far healthier than meat to do with the fact that when it comes down to pound for pound, plant protein-based foods pack more nutrients and fewer calories over meat. On top of this, they also give you one thing that most meat can't, fiber, which aids in the human digestion.
Plant-based proteins do contain the similar proteins to meat-based proteins. However, they do not contain hema iron, and the proteins that are found in soy can inhibit the body's ability to absorb hema iron. So people with anemia or just iron deficiencies in general are going to struggle more if they substitute plant-based proteins in their diet for red meat.
So a vegetarian diet can be associated with poor health as there are higher incidences of cancer, allergies, and mental health disorders. And there will be a higher need for health care and poorer quality of life. Therefore, public programs are needed in order to reduce the health risks due to nutritional factors. A wholly herbivorous diet presented a cancer risk promotion due to the disproportionate intake of omega-3 relative to omega-6. Research found that 5% of omnivores, 68% of lacto-vegetarians, and 83% of vegans were deficient in vitamin B12 and were experiencing a lower quality of life from the side effects of this shortcoming. So what alternatives can you ingest and get the crucial vitamins and minerals that you would normally get from meat?
Although soy and meat are both rich in dietary protein, they differ greatly in nutritional content. Both soy and meat proteins are high quality, complete proteins because they contain all of the essential amino acids your body requires daily. Also, soy does not contain saturated fats as well as high cholesterol, which is why plant protein is healthier than meat protein.
To label plant-based products as meat is simply inaccurate labeling. The definition of meat in the Merriam-Webster dictionary is the flesh of an animal used as food. Plant-based proteins simply aren't meat and shouldn't be labeled as such. They can be considered a substitute or an alternative means to have protein in one's diet, but plant-based protein should not be labeled as meat. The opposition stance seems to be based on replacing meat with plant-based protein rather than just simply the labeling of the product. Even on this basis, plant-based protein is not a direct substitute for meat on not only a nutrition level but also in its properties such as taste, smell, texture, so on and so forth. The properties can be somewhat simulated but not very accurately. If we label plant-based proteins as meat, well, we have to label red meat, real meats, as animal-based. This is nonsense. Meat is flesh and plants are plants.
As we have mentioned, there are many benefits to plant-based protein being labeled as meat. Along with important health benefits, consumers will need to change the way they consume protein because, as we have presented to you, meat-based protein is not a sustainable alternative to plant-based protein diets. Populations are continuing to grow and therefore making it harder for the average consumer to access meats, which will then leave it to an only option of plant-based proteins.